And so I rate this show an 8 out of 10, the end. Thanks for watching. Okay, here's why it's not a legendary perfect score. I love the show, but it really does have boring episodes, cringy scenes, and inconsistencies. What made it still legendary, however, is that despite it all, the positives overcame it.
Well, I think you all look perfect.
Season 1 started off on a fun note. Our main protagonist named Aang, like any normal kid, was a ball of joy and excitement. Although, under that veil of playfulness, the story was filled with mysteries, tragedies, and a destiny that our protagonist needs to fulfill, without actually needing to say the word.
Destiny. Destiny.
Destiny. Destiny has spoken!
The show didn't give the audience the time to catch their breaths. Unlike other shows in its time, it presented the cruel reality of war. The water tribes felt barren, the air temples became empty shells of its former glory, and the grandest countries that remained were deeply broken. This made the consequences for the world without the Avatar much heavier. All of that, however, would have been boring. Most shows should mirror reality less, as much as possible, unless it's based on a true story. I'm looking at you, aeronauts. What made Avatar so interesting even to this day is the mystery of bending. To manipulate the elements is the core of fantasy. It sparks the imagination of all ages. This is the beauty of having a soft magic system. You don't need to explain anything, you just have to show everything. Of course, there are times when it's tempting for writers to answer everything to their audience. It pays well sometimes, but most would just end disastrously. Studio Ghibli proved how powerful the imagination could be. It transcends logic. Although in Avatar's case there are times when a sprinkle of logic is needed just so the referees in us can't yell Deus Ex Machina.
Since beginningless time, darkness thrives in the void, but always yields to purifying light.
And not a fistful of it, Korra. The creators actually went above and beyond in tackling magic by tying it with real-life culture.
You chose them from among thousands of toys, Aang. The toys you picked were the 4 Avatar relics.
It was a gamble at that time, but their hard work paid off. I said earlier that shows should mirror reality less, and that still remains true because it's impossible to avoid reality entirely. When done right, the results are spectacular. They actually took the time learning the movements of martial arts, and incorporated it to the types of elements our heroes could bend. This gave our characters more depth. Just by how they move, it becomes more distinct as to who they are, and what they could do. Aang is surprisingly very normal, even though he has godlike powers, lives in a world that's filled with oddities, and has the body of an immortal. Like, I'd love to see the film theorists dissect the possibility of surviving 100 years in ice, getting struck by lightning, twice, and the lack of bad tan marks, but sure, volcano fumes are apparently the only thing that's deadly. His personality, as a 12-year-old boy, had the taste for adventure, like any kid would dream of. He explores the world, and through his perspective it looked vast and endless. Of course there's a high dose of stupidity mixed in his bravery, but courage is the very foundation of his character. His feelings were naturally apparent. He expressed happiness, love, grief, and anger. These are as simple as the elements that he could bend. He felt relatable most of the time. The next protagonist is Katara. She was practically the real opposite of Aang, not this one. Which made her annoying at times, but understandable.
Ever since you joined us, you've been nothing but selfish and unhelpful. What? Look here, Sugar Queen. I gave up everything I had so that I could teach Aang earthbending.
Her maturity comes from a heart that means well, although her messages don't go through smoothly. Her personality is actually the anchor that keeps the show from drifting wildly. She serves as a reminder that wars have consequences, although her brother, Sokka, may share the same experiences, but he expresses his feelings on it differently.
When our mom died, that was the hardest time in my life. Our family was a mess. But Katara, she had so much strength. She stepped up and took on so much responsibility. She helped fill the void that was left by our mom.
Katara learns to be flexible in their journey. She slowly accepts that there are things that's out of her control, and ironically she also breaks the ice by bridging the gap with Pakku. Now I know that it's big cop-out for the writers to just make Pakku accept her as a student, just because she had that necklace, but the moral of the story was that misogyny is wrong. In reality, it takes time to thaw an old man's beliefs. That's why when you, as a writer, try to mirror reality in your stories, you need to invest more time and effort, so that when problems are resolved, the answers actually make sense, and you can avoid the untimely demise of your audience's immersion, just because the next episodes are the season's finale. It was easier to digest that lesson in Sokka's side. Kids can understandably be belligerent due to ignorance, but they can also change faster, and are open-minded to something new and different, unlike an old war veteran.
Do I really have to wear this? It feels a little girly.
It's a warrior's uniform. You should be proud. The silk thread symbolizes a brave blood that flows through our veins. The gold insignia represents the honor of the warrior's heart.
Bravery and honor.
Sokka is actually an underrated character. Sure, he may be a comic relief most of the time, and sure, you could say that Zuko is the most interesting character of them all, and hey, Toph is undeniably the fan favorite, but what Sokka brings to the table is progress, despite not having bending capabilities. Instead of Aang or Katara always dictating as to what to do, and where to go, it becomes intriguing when plans come from someone who is probably more similar to the audience, which makes him our proxy in the story, and some questions like what if I was there, and do this and that, wouldn't need to be asked. His personality is just as relatable as Aang's, although his spunk is more grounded, due to the literal inability of Aang to keep his feet on the ground.
Aang 7, Sokka 0.
Unlike other characters from other shows that are kept for the slapstick, Sokka has always been reliable, and he is most of the time portrayed as someone who earned his keep. That's why he's my second favorite character in the show. Yeah, that's right, all those positives got outweighed by the sheer genius in creating this character named Toph. The creators really do like gambling after all. That may have been their downfall in the future, but introducing a new protagonist on the second season was a bad idea that suddenly became a very good one. You see, when the main characters have already been established from the start, all of their joys, griefs, and experiences are shared. This becomes a part of the audience's memory, and when those memories get trampled by a new character, there's a huge risk for Toph to be hated. This is also why Korra was hated so much by a lot of fans, but I don't, and that's for another video. Also, retelling a story just so a new character could catch up is unappealing. Flashbacks and recaps are frowned upon even if the series has hundreds of episodes, especially since binge watching is easier to do nowadays. Toph's personality is the epitome of subversion. She was introduced as a small and fragile child, like who would even consider being blind as a key, to become powerful, in a fantasy setting no less. It's not that her appearance should reflect her character, but it's something that's so good that you'd wish for most people to be as free as her. Although her background was made as quickly as possible, we still came to an understanding as to why she acts the way she does. Strict parents is the most common theme you could ever put in a story, along with the list of top 10's most common experiences in life, but most of the time, simplicity is beautiful. Her way bending the earth, however, came at the cost of diminishing the mystery of the story's soft magic system. The shock value was worth it though, because it cemented her position as the best character for answering the first question that came to mind when Earthbenders were introduced.
Quit your banging! You might think you're the greatest Earthbender in the world, but even you can't bend metal.
Things might have been different, and maybe even boring, if that answer came from a burly old man who was somewhat wise enough to figure things out. It's a trope that's been there since the word mentor was born. That's why her uniqueness really stood out. Last but far from the least, is Soku. This character was cleverly hidden as a protagonist in the guise of what could have been a generic, horrifically scarred supervillain with anger management issues who fails to catch his prey at every turn. It could have gone one way or the other, as a comedic skit, like Team Rocket, or a very serious one, who's destined to die a horrible death. Outstandingly, The writers gave him more depth than any other character in the story. His grief fueled his determination for a redemption from someone who was actually hollow. Frustration became the very essence of his destructive power, but deep inside, despite all the odds, he actually had principles, which were never broken since the very beginning, to the story's end. But wait, some might ask. Isn't his arc all about change? Wasn't he supposed to be a really evil dude? Who converted to a good guy? And became better than what his evil father and sister could ever be? The answer is
Yes, no, 10,552.
is code for maybe. It's understandable that this became a common trope due to the legends of Darth Vader. Zuko may have changed sides, but he was never evil to begin with. Now look at this scene.
Lieutenant, you'd better learn some respect, or I will teach it to you.
And compare it to this one.
Would the tides think twice about smashing you against the rocky shore?
No, Princess.
Well then, maybe you should worry less about the tides, who've already made up their mind about killing you, and worry more about me, who's still mulling it over.
Both could have been easily the same, mean bosses who lack compassion, but the major difference here is the lack of death threats, even at the time when he was very desperate, like a normal human whom we constantly forget, is but a child as well. When he started his journey, he stuck with his principles, and tried his best to right his wrongs. This is why Uncle Iroh had so much hope for him, to clear up the misunderstandings in his head, and to ultimately free his heart from real guilt.
You are not the man you used to be, Zuko. You are stronger and wiser and freer than you have ever been. And now you have come to the crossroads of your destiny. It's time for you to choose. It's time for you to choose good.
Zuko thought that he wronged his family, his father, and by catching the Avatar he would be forgiven, shrouded in this facade of restoring his honor. It took time and more effort for him to separate his principles from lies. That's why he had a mental breakdown, pondering who to actually trust, and when he tried to convert to a good guy it felt forced, a betrayal of his principle, because he never believed what Iroh said at that time. Later on, when he actually believed it, the lies were washed away. Learning the truth of his ancestry, he saw the wrongs that his country wrought upon the world, and finally the parenting method he believed to be normal revealed itself to be abuse. After all of that, like always, he made the effort of righting his wrongs without giving up, despite the ones whom he needed to redeem to were more hostile than his Ozai was. Sure, he shot lightning at Zuko without flinching, but that was after provoking him. Katara, however, with her blood-bending abilities, by the time of their awkward reunion, says this.
You might have everyone else here buying your transformation, but you and I both know you've struggled with doing the right thing in the past. So let me tell you something right now. You make one step backward, one slip up, give me one reason to think you might hurt Aang, and you won't have to worry about your destiny anymore, because I'll make sure your destiny ends, right then and there.
At least Azula gave this guy a fighting chance with the sea. Now Ozai and Azula are a whole other level of psycho that I don't want to expand on. TLDR, they're the show's irredeemable supervillains, because Season 4 was never meant to exist due to financial constraints.
From this moment on, I will be known as the Phoenix King.
The fight between Ozai and Aang looked epic, but the inconsistencies stacked up, with every rule broken, as the fight escalates, but the goodwill from the audience, and the solid parts of the story, made up for it all. Ending things with a bang can become amazing, even at the expense of the story's structure. It's the end after all, so the future would have remained in the imagination of the audience, and just accept it for what it is, until this one aired. Well, all in all, great show. Music was good. Art style, well, it's at least a decade old, so it was high time for a renewal. Hopefully Netflix stays true to the story. After watching the Witcher series, I believe they could do a better job compared to the ones who made the Avatar movie. So I wish them all the success and luck in the world as they work on their projects. Thanks for watching.